Hi, first grade teachers. My name is Kelly, and today I'm going to walk you through the Iowa unit plan for first grade social studies. This is the final social studies unit of the year, has 13 lessons, and should take 16 to 18 days to complete. Be sure to take a look at the question map if you would like to see the breakdown of the unit. In this unit, students are going to learn the difference between primary and secondary sources. Remember, students learned about primary sources in the communities unit. Students will also practice figuring out if the source is mostly fact or opinion. Students will practice their geography skills by using maps, and students will also learn about the last social scientist, which is the historian. The Meskwaki Native American tribe of Iowa is part of this unit. Students will use a timeline, compare Iowa life in the past and present, and take a look at the modern Meskwaki culture. There's a slideshow that can be used to help move through the instruction. And as you can see, it is a mystery theme for this unit, so have fun with that aspect if you'd like. The compelling question for this unit is, what makes Iowa special? And we have 3 supporting questions. What can I do in Iowa? Who lived in Iowa in the past? And how has Iowa changed over time? Again, the unit is split into 3 chapters, 1 per supporting question. Chapter 1 is called My Iowa, and we focus on supporting question 1. Students are going to learn the difference between primary and secondary sources, use maps to consider the basic geography of Iowa, find out about various attractions in Iowa, and compare and contrast different routes to places at the Iowa State Fair. Please keep in mind, not every student has been to the Iowa State Fair, so focus more on using the map rather than on this big concept of attending the fair. Lesson 1 begins with a brief mystery activity, and it can be pretty much any activity you want, but there are a few ideas selected, such as talking about solving a mystery, using a clip from a kid's show that solves mysteries like Dora or Team Umizoomi. You can create a mystery in the classroom that students have to solve, or you can read a book like Miss Nelson and that has a mystery in it. Share that students are going to be solving a mystery over the next few weeks and then explain the compelling question. Remind students about the meaning of sources and the meaning of a primary source. This goes a little bit more in depth than in the communities unit so that students can better understand what primary source actually means. Then you move into explaining secondary sources. And really the difference between a primary and a secondary source is a primary source was going to have been created when the event happened or by someone who was there. A secondary source is going to be something that was created long after the event was over or by someone who wasn't there. So let's say someone had a grandma who saw a certain president get elected, but the grandma didn't write it down. The grandma told the stories to the grandkid, and then the grandkid eventually wrote it down. That would make it a secondary source. Versus if the grandma had written down, it would have been the primary source. There's a primary and secondary sources worksheet that students can use to complete to practice these. I'd recommend completing this in a small group or with a partner. Lesson 2, students take a look at this physical map where we can see some of the different environmental features. Have students find Iowa, and then take a look at this section where the Rockies are and ask students to point out what they notice. Students might point out that this part is brown versus Iowa is in green, and you can start talking about why that is. Then move on to this map and point out that we have brown and green in here. So the brown is going to show higher elevation, meaning higher hills, and the green might show lower areas with mostly grass and valleys. You might want to point out the 2 main rivers that create up the borders of the state. Also be sure to talk about the weather and climate of Iowa, as this will help us when we make comparisons to locations later on. Lesson 3 is all about the attractions of Iowa and the landmarks of Iowa. There are quite a few slides that you can use to take a look at different locations, such as Lake Okoboji, Effigy Mound, Spook Cave, Ledges State Park, and some of the main attractions in Des Moines area, such as the Capitol, the zoo, etc. At the end of the lesson, students complete the Iowa attractions page. You might want to consider giving it to students earlier on so that they can pick something that they like and explore it more before they complete this worksheet. Lesson 4 starts off with looking at this primary source picture from the Iowa State Fair. You might want to ask students if they've ever attended a fair or a festival in their town or community. There is a link to a bit of a song from the State Fair musical, which takes place in Iowa, called Our State Fair is a Great State Fair. Kind of a fun one to listen to. You can share that this was made about the Iowa State Fair. There's a bit of text that you can read about the fair, but the biggest focus of this lesson is this map. And I would recommend having copies of it for students so that they can mark up the different locations and routes. Give students time to explore the different aspects of this map. You might want to remind them what this key stands for, and you might want to talk about some of the different attractions that can be found. In the lesson plan, there's suggestions for a couple activities for students to practice finding different routes from one building to another. Give students time to trace a couple of different routes to figure out which one looks faster and to figure out why. Chapter 2, we learn about the people of Iowa. In particular, we're going to take a look at the Meskwaki people, as well as some of the different settlers and immigrants who came to Iowa in the past. We kick off lesson 5 by highlighting our social scientist, the historian. We practice these skills by taking a look at this picture of a Meskwaki woman and her child in a wiki-up in Tama, Iowa. You can have students complete a WDIS, which means what do I see, where they simply list out what they notice in the picture. Have students create questions about what they see in the picture. Students might want to think about what a historian would ask or any of the other social scientists. This is an important skill to practice as it meets one of our inquiry standards. Lesson 6, we focus on cultures. There's a text to read and then a series of slides that you can use where we define culture and we can start picking out some different characteristics of cultures. Lesson 7, we start talking about Native Americans, and we talk a little bit about how we learn about Native American cultures from the past. There's a text about Native Americans that is helpful to give some of this information. Since we're using that source, the Native Americans text, be a good thing to figure out if it's a primary or a secondary source, as well as practice whether it's mostly fact or opinion and how we can figure that out. In lesson 8, we learn a little bit about the Sac and Fox, and this leads us into a discussion about the Meskwaki. We have lots of images that we can look at to learn about some of the different cultural aspects of the Meskwaki. Students can complete the Meskwaki tribe worksheet to explain one thing they learned about the Meskwaki tribe. Lesson 9, we learn more about who else lived in Iowa in the past, and in order to do that, we have to figure out a little bit about how Iowa became a state. So we spend just a teeny bit of time talking about this thing called the Louisiana Purchase. And this is something that students will spend time on in 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade. So don't feel like you have to spend a lot of time on this one. Then there's some text on the history of Iowa and why Europeans first came to Iowa and the effects it had on the Native Americans living in the state. Students then work on the Iowa timeline worksheet in order to meet Standard 20. So in this worksheet, students have different events that happened with dates, and we want to place them on the timeline and put them in order. So we can number them here and just put the corresponding number up on the timeline. In lesson 10, we talk a little bit about immigrants arriving in Iowa. This is also a topic that is hit again in 3rd grade. So again, keep it as a brief overview. Chapter 3 is all about then and now of Iowa. So how has Iowa changed over time? Students are going to compare Iowa life in the past and present, especially focusing on the modern Meskwaki culture. Lesson 11 is all about modern Meskwaki life. We can use these 2 pictures to help think about how Iowa has changed over time. These are the 2 pictures that were used in the community unit of the 2 different grocery stores. We can talk about how population changed in Iowa. There's a text that supports that. And then we start moving into some aspects of Meskwaki life where we're looking at the wiki-up picture and then comparing to some of the more modern aspects that are found in the Meskwaki settlement in Tama. Lesson 12, we have a past versus present worksheet. And what these are 2 images kind of per topic area. So we have the 2 grocery stores, we have the 2 methods of farming, and then we have 2 images of the Iowa State Fair. What students can do is they can look at the pictures on each page and compare the 2, one's from the past, one's from the present, and they can look for things that are different, they can look for things that are same, and they can make some observations or even generate some more questions about what they see in the pictures. Lesson 13 is the summative assessment, and it's called Solving the Mystery. But basically, this is students answering the compelling question using examples. Answering it with examples helps meet our inquiry standard 4. I hope this video has been a helpful resource as you prepare to teach the Iowa unit. Please reach out to your PLC leader, instructional coach, or curriculum facilitator if you have any questions or are in need of any additional support.